The night air cut like broken glass. Snow hissed across the dead pines as 5 riders forced their horses through the black wilderness, their lanterns swaying like hanging souls in the storm. Between them, tied by the wrists and dragged behind a saddle, stumbled a boy no older than 9. His small boots tore trenches in the snow. His lips were blue. His crying had long since turned silent. Behind him, the lights of Black Hollow vanished behind the trees, the same town where he had laughed that morning beside his mother's stove, the same town where his father had promised him spring would bring greener fields and gentler days. But spring would never come for the Mercer family. Not after Sheriff Boone carved a lie into the heart of the town. Not after the ranchers decided Elias Mercer knew too much. The boy lifted his head through the wind, tears frozen against his cheeks, and saw the men's faces in flashes of lantern light. Sheriff Boone, Silas Crow, Mayor Tully, men who had once eaten at his family's table. Now they rode him toward death. "You should have let your father keep his mouth shut," Boone growled over his shoulder. The boy tried to scream back, but the cold had stolen his voice. At last they reached the ridge. Below it yawned a ravine swallowed in darkness, where the locals whispered wolves denned every winter. Boone dismounted first. He ripped the boy from the rope and threw him hard against a frost-covered pine. The child hit the trunk with a cry, then gasped as Boone bound him tighter with rawhide. The men stepped back. Then the first howl split the night. Long, low, close. Silas Crow swallowed hard. "Sheriff, maybe this is enough." Boone's eyes never blinked. "No," he said. "Bloodlines grow into vengeance. Better the wolves finish what we started." Another howl answered. Closer. Shapes moved between the trees. The boy's breath trembled as glowing eyes appeared in the dark. 1 pair, then 3, then 6. The wolves circled slowly, their paws silent against the snow. The men mounted their horses, and they rode away. The child screamed after them as the lantern lights disappeared into the storm. Now only the wolves remained. The largest among them stepped forward. A scarred alpha, massive and silver-black, with 1 torn ear and eyes like old fire. The beast stared into the boy's soul. Its breath steamed into the freezing dark. It opened its jaws and bit through the rawhide rope. The boy collapsed into the snow. The wolves did not attack. They stood around him like silent sentries. And when the storm rose into a white fury, the alpha lay beside him, shielding him from the wind until dawn. The night they left him for wolves, Black Hollow believed they were burying a bloodline. But the wilderness had other plans. By sunrise, the child was gone. And 20 years later, the West whispered a new name in fear. The Devil's Hunter. Before the Devil's Hunter returns for revenge, hit that like button and subscribe, because tonight's story proves the wilderness never forgets the children the world tried to bury. By morning, the storm had buried every hoof print. The boy awoke beneath a shelter of pine branches and wolf fur. The alpha sat at the mouth of the makeshift den, watching the white valley below. For a long moment, the child thought he had died. Then he heard boots crunch in the snow. A figure emerged through the trees. Tall, wrapped in weathered buckskin and wolf pelts, a long rifle slung over one shoulder. His face was carved by age, wind, and old sorrow. This was Jeremiah Voss, the mountain tracker men called half ghost, half myth. He looked from the wolves to the boy and said only one sentence. "So, the mountain chose you too." The child tried to speak. "My father." Voss knelt beside him. "I know what they did." The boy's eyes widened. Voss stared toward Black Hollow, far beyond the ridge. "They killed your father because he found gold under Crow's ranch. Enough gold to buy 10 towns. Your father wanted the land shared fairly." The boy's chest tightened. He remembered his father's last words before the sheriff dragged him away. "Truth always survives longer than lies, son." Now, the truth had cost him everything. The alpha wolf nudged the boy's hand. Warm, protective, alive. Voss stood. "If you stay here, the mountain might teach you how to survive." The boy looked toward the distant valley where his home once stood. The smoke was gone. The life was gone. All that remained was cold and memory. He rose on trembling legs. "What's your name, boy?" He swallowed the pain in his throat. "Caleb." Voss nodded once. "Then, from this day forward, Caleb Mercer is dead to Black Hollow." The wolves began to move uphill. Voss followed. Caleb took one final look at the town that had murdered his family. Then he stepped into the wilderness and vanished. The outlaw ran bleeding through Devil's Pass. Moonlight spilled across jagged rocks as his boots slipped on loose stone. Behind him came no hoofbeats, no voices, no warning, only silence. That was what terrified men most. Silence meant the devil's hunter was near. The outlaw reached the canyon wall and froze. A shadow stood above him, tall, still, wrapped in black leather and wolf fur. Twin revolvers gleamed at his hips, and beside him stood the scarred alpha wolf, older now, larger somehow, like death itself had grown teeth. The outlaw dropped to his knees. "Please? I'll pay double?" The hunter stepped forward, moonlight revealing cold eyes beneath the brim of his hat. Eyes that carried the memory of snow, of betrayal, of wolves. "You can't pay back the dead," he said. The shot echoed through the canyon. And by sunrise, another wanted poster had been marked with one name. The Devil's Hunter. The West had learned to fear the child it once tried to feed to wolves. And now Caleb Mercer had finally found the trail that led home, Black Hollow. The sun was dying behind the western cliffs when the rider appeared. At first, Black Hollow saw only a silhouette, a lone horse moving through a storm of dust, tall in the saddle, unhurried, certain. The town had changed in 20 years, but not enough to hide its sins. The church steeple still leaned crooked over Main Street. The saloon still bled piano music into the evening air. The sheriff's office still stood at the center like a monument to fear. But the people looked older, richer, heavier with secrets. Caleb Mercer pulled his horse to a stop at the edge of town and stared down the street where his father had once carried him on his shoulders. He remembered laughter, candles glowing through their cabin window, his mother humming while bread baked on the stove. Then the memory twisted Sheriff Boone's hand on his father's collar, his mother screaming, the fire, the snow, the wolves. The scarred alpha padded silently beside the horse, emerging from the shadows like an omen. Several townsfolk noticed the beast and quickly stepped out of the street. Whispers spread like dry brush catching flame. "Who is that?" "Looks like Death himself. That wolf ain't natural." Caleb said nothing. His black coat shifted in the wind. Wolf fur draped across one shoulder like a war trophy from the wilderness that had raised him. Twin revolvers rested low at his hips, polished but worn by use. He guided the horse forward. Every hoofbeat sounded like a countdown toward the saloon, toward the first name. The Crow Saloon had once been a stable. Now it stood fat on stolen gold. Laughter spilled from its bat-wing doors. Men drank beneath chandeliers paid for with blood and lies. Above the bar hung a portrait of Silas Crow, older now, silver-haired and thick around the middle, but his eyes still carried the greed Caleb remembered from the night of the storm. Silas had been there when they tied the rope. Silas had heard the howls. Silas had ridden away. Caleb stepped through the saloon doors. The piano died mid-note. Conversation snapped into silence. Heads turned. The wolf entered behind him. A few men reached for their pistols and thought better of it. Silas Crow looked up from his whiskey. At first, irritation flashed across his face, then confusion, then something deeper, recognition trying to claw its way through old memory. Caleb approached the bar. "One whiskey," he said. Bartender's hands shook as he poured. Silas squinted. "Do I know you?" Caleb lifted the glass but did not drink. "You knew my father." Silas frowned. The saloon seemed to hold its breath. Caleb's eyes hardened. "Elias Mercer." The glass slipped from same. Silas's hand and shattered across the floor, his face drained white. Impossible. That boy had died. He had heard the wolves, seen the snow, watched Sheriff Boone leave him tied at the den, yet the eyes staring back at him were the same storm-gray eyes of the child who had begged for mercy. Silas rose too fast, knocking over his chair. "You, Caleb, cut him off. You stole the gold under our land." Silas's hand drifted toward the shotgun beneath the bar. "You got no proof." Caleb set the untouched whiskey down. "No," he said, "but I have your fear." The room tightened. The wolf growled low. Silas made his move. He lunged for the shotgun, but Caleb was faster. The revolver cleared leather in a blur. One shot. The blast shattered every bottle behind the bar. Silas froze. His hand hovered inches from the shotgun. A dark stain spread across his vest. Then he collapsed against the shelves, dragging stolen whiskey and glass down with him. The entire saloon stood in stunned silence. Caleb stepped over the broken bottles and leaned close enough for the dying man to hear, "This is for the night you listened," to a child scream. Silas's last breath rattled out like broken coins. Dead. The first debt paid. Outside, the church bell began to ring. Not for prayer, for fear. People poured into the street as word spread. Silas Crow was dead, killed by a stranger with a wolf at his side. From an upstairs window across the street, a woman watched through parted curtains. Her breath caught. No one else in Black Hollow recognized the rider, but she did. Not his face. Not yet. His eyes. The same eyes that had once belonged to the boy who gave her wildflowers by the river. Evelyn Hart, the blacksmith's daughter, the only soul who had cried when Caleb vanished. Now grown into a woman, sharpened by loss and quiet endurance, she whispered too, with herself. "Caleb? Down below?" Caleb mounted his horse. He could feel the town's fear spreading. Good. Fear softened lies. Fear made old men careless. And Sheriff Boone would hear about Silas before midnight. That was the point. This was never just revenge. It was a hunt. He wanted Boone afraid, wanted him sleepless, wanted him hearing wolves in every gust of wind. Before leaving Main Street, Caleb stopped at the old hanging tree in the center of town, the same tree where his father had been falsely condemned. He dismounted, dragged Silas's body from the saloon, and tied him upright against the trunk. Pinned to his chest with a hunting knife was a strip of leather burned with one symbol. A wolf's mark beneath it, a carved message. The town recoiled. Mothers pulled children indoors. Men locked doors. No one touched the body, because somewhere beyond the rooftops, a wolf howled. Then another answered from the hills. Then another from the forest ridge. Black Hollow had begun to remember the night it tried to bury a child, and Caleb Mercer had only just arrived. That same night, deep inside the sheriff's office, old Sheriff Boone stared at Silas's corpse through the window. His whiskey trembled in his hand. For the first time in 20 years, fear found him. On his desk lay an old file stamped with a dead man's name, Elias Mercer. Inside it was the truth Boone had killed to protect. And now the sun had returned to dig it out. Outside, wolves howled beneath a blood-red moon, and Boone whispered the words he never thought he'd say again. The boy survived. Night settled over Black Hollow like a funeral cloth. The town had gone silent after Silas Crow's death. No piano from the saloon, no laughter in the streets, only shuttered windows, bolted doors, and frightened whispers leaking through cracks in old wood. Above it all, the hanging tree stood in the square, Silas's body swaying in the wind beneath the wolf mark. A warning, a memory, a promise. Beyond the town limits, where the river cut through moonlit stone, Caleb waited beneath the old iron bridge. This was where children once came to skip rocks and trade secrets. This was where he had met Evelyn Hart every summer evening, long before Black Hollow taught itself how to lie. The scarred alpha wolf rested nearby, yellow eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the reeds. Then came the sound of footsteps, soft, careful, familiar. A woman emerged from the shadows in a dark cloak, hood drawn low against the cold. She stopped when she saw him. For a long moment, neither moved. The river whispered beneath the bridge. Finally, she pulled back her hood. Evelyn, older now, her features sharpened by years of hardship, but still carrying the same quiet strength Caleb remembered from childhood. Her eyes searched his face, trembling with disbelief. It really is you. Caleb said nothing at first. His gaze stayed hard. But something flickered beneath it, something the wilderness had not managed to kill. Recognition, memory, a life stolen before it could begin. Evelyn stepped closer. They told us you died. I did, Caleb said coldly. That night in the snow, the words hit her like a gunshot. Tears gathered in her eyes. I looked for you, she whispered, for weeks. My father said if Sheriff Boone found out, he'd hang him too. Caleb turned toward the river. The moonlight trembled across the water like broken silver. I didn't come back for ghosts. Evelyn. She followed his stare. No, she said softly. You came back for Boone. At the sheriff's name, the alpha lifted its head and growled. Caleb nodded once. But Boone isn't the whole truth. Evelyn hesitated, then reached into her cloak and pulled out an old leather ledger wrapped in cloth. Dust clung to its edges. The binding was cracked with age. My father hid this before he died, she said. He told me if the Mercers ever returned, this belonged to them. Caleb took it slowly. The moment his fingers touched the worn leather, something in his chest tightened. He opened it. Inside were land records, mining maps, signatures, and there, burned into the page like a scar from the past, was Sheriff Boone's name beside Silas Crow's. Gold claims, illegal seizures, property transfers. Every page traced back to one lie. Elias Mercer had discovered gold beneath the northern ridge, enough to make Black Hollow the richest town in the territory. Boone and Crow had framed him as a traitor, stolen the claim, and used the town's fear to silence anyone who questioned it. But then Caleb's eyes caught something worse. A final signature, a third name. His hand froze. Mayor Tully, the man who had presided over his father's hanging. The one man Caleb had not yet accounted for. He's still alive, Evelyn said quietly, and Boone's closest ally. Caleb closed the ledger. His jaw tightened. Then the wolf suddenly rose to its feet, ears forward, teeth bared. Something was wrong. From the ridge above the bridge came the metallic click of rifles. Then a voice, old, cold, triumphant. I was wondering when she'd lead me to you. Sheriff Boone stepped out beneath the moonlight, flanked by 6 armed deputies. Lanterns flared behind them, rifles leveled. Evelyn's face drained of color. Boone's eyes never left Caleb. Even with age bent into his shoulders, the sheriff still carried the same cruelty that had once dragged a child into the snow. I should have known you'd come crawling back to the only fool who ever cared whether you lived. Evelyn stepped in front of Caleb. No, Boone's smile was poison. Move aside, girl. This bloodline should have ended 20 years ago. Caleb slowly handed the ledger back to Evelyn. Take the river path, he murmured. What about you? His eyes shifted toward Boone. "I've survived worse than old men with rifles." The deputies cocked their weapons. Boone raised a hand. "Kill the wolf first." The first shot cracked through the night. But the alpha moved faster than fear. It lunged into the reeds as bullets tore through moonlit grass. Chaos exploded. The wolf slammed into one deputy, dragging him screaming into the riverbank mud. Caleb drew both revolvers in a blur of silver fire. 2 shots. 2 men dropped before they could blink. Evelyn ran for the river path, clutching the ledger. Boone roared, "After her! That ledger dies tonight." The bridge became a battlefield of firelight, smoke, and thunder. Caleb moved like the storm itself, cold, precise, unstoppable. Every shot was deliberate. Every step a memory of mountain training and childhood rage. A deputy rushed him from the side. Caleb spun, slammed the man into the iron beams, and whispered through clenched teeth, "This is for my father." The revolver thundered. Another body fell into the river below. Boone backed away, suddenly realizing too late what the West already knew. This was no man. This was the wilderness returning its debt. Smoke swallowed the bridge. The last deputy screamed as the alpha wolf drove him into the black. Water. Boone fired wildly, then turned and ran into the darkness of the hills. Caleb took aim, but Evelyn's voice cut through the smoke. "Caleb! The ledger, Tully's ranch!" He lowered the gun. The sheriff could run. For now. Because the truth had just changed the hunt. This was never just about revenge. It was about exposing the conspiracy that murdered his family, and now Mayor. Tully was next. Caleb mounted his horse as the wolf emerged from the mist, fur dark with river water and blood. Evelyn climbed behind him, still clutching the ledger. For the first time since returning, Caleb was not riding alone. As they vanished into the hills, Boone staggered into his office. Breathless and shaking, he opened the locked drawer beneath his desk. Inside was a yellowed letter written by Elias Mercer the night before his execution. Boone stared at the seal, hands trembling, then whispered, "If Caleb reads this, everything burns." Outside, wolves howled beneath the moon, and the hunt turned toward Mayor Tully's ranch. Dawn bled slowly across the eastern ridge. A red, wounded sunrise stretched over the plains as Caleb and Evelyn reached the cliffs above Mayor Tully's ranch. From a distance, it looked less like a home and more like a fortress built from stolen years. High fences, armed men on watchtowers, oil lanterns still burning from Boone's warning ride in the night, and beneath it all, the northern ridge where Caleb's father had once found the gold that should have changed Black Hollow forever. The scarred Alpha crouched low beside Caleb, its breath steaming in the cold dawn. Below them, wagons moved in and out of a hidden mine entrance cut into the earth behind the ranch house. Crates, rifles, gold ore. Evelyn tightened her grip on the stolen ledger. "My father was right," she whispered. They were still mining it. Caleb's eyes narrowed. For 20 years they had not only stolen his father's discovery, they had built an empire on it. Every brick in Black Hollow, every chandelier in Crow's saloon, every badge Boone ever wore, all of it had been bought with Mercer blood. His jaw tightened. Then today the mine dies with them. They circled wide through the canyon, brush until they reached the outer stables. The ranch hands were half asleep, confident that Boone's deputies had finished the job at the bridge, that arrogance would cost them. The Alpha slipped ahead, silent as frost. A single growl, a muffled cry, then silence again. Caleb moved through the barn doors with Evelyn behind him. Inside, the smell of hay and gun oil mixed with something older, dust, forgotten wood, secrets. Then Caleb saw it. Burned into one of the barn's support beams was an old carving. His breath caught. He had carved those initials with Evelyn when they were children. This had once been his family's land. Tully had not just stolen the gold. He had stolen the Mercer ranch itself and rebuilt it into his kingdom. The realization hit Caleb like fire in the lungs. Every board around him had once belonged to his father. Every fence post had once marked their dreams. Now it housed thieves. Evelyn touched his arm. Caleb. But his eyes had gone cold again. No more hesitation, no more ghosts. Only justice. The first explosion shattered the silence. Caleb had rigged the mine carts with black powder, taken from Boone's own supply wagons during the bridge ambush. The blast tore through the outer shaft entrance, sending rock and flame into the dawn sky. Men shouted, bells rang, rifles thundered from the watchtowers. Caleb burst from the barn like a storm. Twin revolvers flashed. One guard dropped from the tower before his warning cry was finished. The Alpha launched at another, dragging him screaming into the dust. Evelyn fired from cover with a repeater rifle, her face fierce beneath the morning light. This was no frightened girl by the river anymore. This was a woman defending the truth. Mayor Tooley stumbled out onto the ranch porch in his nightcoat, panic in his pale face. What in God's name? Then he saw Caleb, and the blood left his body. The same eyes, the same Mercer stare. Impossible. He backed toward the front door. You were supposed to die. Caleb advanced through the smoke. So were the men you stole from. The ranch erupted into chaos. Workers fled. Deputies hired by Boone fired from windows. Bullets tore through porch rails and stable doors. But Caleb moved through it all like vengeance made flesh. Every shot landed. Every enemy fell. Every step brought him closer to the man who had signed his father's death. Tully ran into the study. Caleb kicked the door open behind him. Inside, maps of the mine covered the walls. Gold bars stacked in crates glimmered in the firelight. And there, on the desk, lay an opened letter. The seal, Mercer. Boone must have sent it ahead. Tully reached for a pistol in the drawer, but Caleb's bullet pinned his hand to the wood. Tully screamed. Caleb snatched the letter. The handwriting struck him like a ghost's voice. His father's. He unfolded it slowly. The room seemed to vanish as Elias Mercer's final words came alive. To whoever finds this, I did not betray Black Hollow. I found gold beneath the northern ridge. Yes. But it was never meant for greed. The land belongs equally to every family who built this town. I refused Boone, Crow, and Tully when they demanded I sign it over. They threatened Caleb. They threatened his mother. If I die, know this. My silence was not surrender. It was the price of keeping my son alive. Caleb, if somehow these words reach you, survive long enough to become the truth they feared. The letter trembled in Caleb's hand. For 20 years he had lived on vengeance. Now he finally held the reason his father chose death over obedience. Not weakness, not betrayal, love. A father's final act to save his child. Behind him, Tully whimpered through the pain. You don't understand. Boone forced all of us. Caleb turned. The grief in his eyes had hardened into something far more terrifying. Clarity. You all chose it. Tully crawled toward the fireplace, dragging his bleeding hand. There's still enough gold here to make you king. Caleb's face darkened. My father wanted justice. The alpha wolf stepped into the doorway, blocking escape. Smoke from the burning mine began curling beneath the study door. The whole ranch was about to collapse into flame. Caleb grabbed Tully by the collar and dragged him outside onto the porch where the townsfolk, mine workers, and fleeing guards could see. He forced Tully to his knees in the dirt. This land was stolen from every family in Black Hollow, Caleb said, his voice carrying across the smoke-filled yard. He held up Elias Mercer's letter. The truth dies today only if you let it. The workers stared. Then, one by one, they lowered their rifles. Tully's empire cracked in real time. The lie was over. Caleb stepped back. Behind him, the mine shaft gave a thunderous roar as the deeper charges ignited. The entire northern ridge erupted. Fire, rock, gold, 20 years of stolen greed buried in its own grave. Tully screamed as the porch roof collapsed behind him. The ranch was falling. So was the corruption that built it. As the survivors fled, Evelyn approached Caleb through drifting ash. She looked at the letter in his hand. What now? Caleb stared toward Black Hollow in the distance. Sheriff Boone was still alive, still the architect of it all. And now Caleb finally understood the last hunt was no longer about rage. It was about finishing his father's truth. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside his coat, then mounted his horse. The Alpha moved beside him. Wolves howled from the ridge as smoke swallowed Tully's burning ranch. Caleb's eyes turned toward town, toward the forest, toward the place where the lie began. Now, he said, we hunt the man who taught this town how to fear the truth. And with that, the Devil's Hunter rode toward the final reckoning. Night returned with a cruel familiarity. The same forest, the same frozen wind, the same black pines clawing at the moonlit sky. 20 years had passed, yet every tree still stood like a witness. Every shadow still remembered. This was Wolf Forest, the place where Black Hollow had tried to erase a child. Now it would become the graveyard of its greatest lie. Caleb rode in silence beneath the skeletal branches, Evelyn close behind him, the scarred Alpha moving ahead through the snow like a spirit guiding the dead. No one spoke. Words had no place here. The forest itself was speaking. Through the wind, through the cracking ice, through the distant howls rolling between the hills, Boone had fled exactly where Caleb knew he would, back to the place of his first sin. Men like Boone always ran toward old lies, hoping familiar darkness could still protect them. But the wilderness had changed sides long ago. At the heart of the forest stood the ravine, the wolf den, the pine tree, the very trunk where Caleb's wrists had once been cut raw by Boone's rope. He dismounted slowly. His boots sank into the snow. The moment his hand touched the scarred bark, the past rushed through him. His mother's scream, his father's voice, the circling wolves, the raw terror of a child left alone in the dark, then the metallic click of a rifle. Still, sentimental boy. Boone's voice slithered through the trees, old, bitter, cracked by fear and whiskey. Sheriff Boone stepped from behind the rocks above the ravine, lantern light trembling in one hand, rifle in the other. He looked smaller now. Age had bent him, but the poison in his eyes had survived untouched. Behind Caleb, Evelyn reached for her rifle. Caleb lifted a hand. No, this was his. Boone spat into the snow. You should have died here. Caleb's voice came low and steady. I almost did. The wind sharpened. Wolves began to howl from every direction. Boone's gaze flicked nervously into the dark. Then he forced a laugh. You think this is justice? Your father would have done the same if he had the nerve. The lie struck the air like a slap. Caleb stepped closer. My father died protecting this town from men like you. Boone's lip curled. Your father died because he was weak. That word, weak. It broke the last chain holding Caleb's rage in place. But this was no wild anger. This was something colder, more dangerous. The kind of fury that waits 20 years for the perfect shot. Boone fired first. The rifle blast tore bark from the pine as Caleb dove into the snow. The forest exploded into motion. Boone ran deeper. Into the ravine, lantern swinging wildly through the trees. Caleb gave chase. No horse, no gunfire, just boots, breath, and memory. The hunt had become primal. Man against monster, victim against executioner. Snow cracked beneath them as they tore through the forest. Boone stumbled over roots, panic growing louder in every ragged breath. Caleb followed like a shadow, silent, unstoppable. Then Boone reached the frozen river, crossing the same river that fed the wolf den. He spun, dropped the empty rifle, and pulled a revolver from beneath his coat. This time, Caleb stopped. Moonlight spilled across the ice between them. The scarred Alpha appeared behind Boone, blocking retreat. Yellow eyes glowed in the dark. Boone's hand shook. For the first time in his life, the sheriff knew exactly what fear tasted like. It tasted like the snow he once left a child to die in. It tasted like wolves. Boone aimed the revolver, but his courage was already dead. "You want the truth?" he shouted. The forest went still. Even the wolves seemed to listen. Boone laughed bitterly. "Your father wasn't just protecting the town." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Boone's grin twisted. He knew the gold would bring railroad men, land thieves, soldiers. He knew Black Hollow would become a battlefield. Evelyn's breath caught behind Caleb. Boone continued. He was right. The words hung in the frozen air. For the first time, Boone was telling the truth. We wanted wealth. He wanted peace. So I made the town choose fear instead. Caleb's hand tightened on his revolver. The final shape of the lie had become clear. His father had not merely died protecting his family. He had died protecting the soul of Black Hollow itself. Boone sneered. "And now look at you. Exactly what I created." Caleb's expression darkened. "No," he said. "You created the night." He raised the revolver. The wilderness created what survived it. The shot rang like thunder through the pines. Boone staggered backward. His revolver slipped from numb fingers. Then the ice beneath him cracked. A sharp, violent split. He looked down too late. The frozen river gave way. Boone plunged into the black water below with a scream swallowed by the night. The current dragged him beneath the ice. Gone. No grave. No badge. No lie left standing. Only silence. Then the wolves howled. Not in hunger, in judgment, in witness. Caleb stood over the shattered river, breathing clouds into the moonlight. The scarred Alpha stepped beside him and pressed its head against his arm. The same gesture it had given a terrified child 20 years ago. This time, Caleb understood. The wilderness had never saved him for revenge alone. It had saved him to become the truth. Behind him, Evelyn approached quietly. "It's over." Caleb looked toward the horizon where dawn was beginning to stain the snow with gold. Black Hollow would wake to a new morning, a town stripped of its lies. Land finally returned to its people. He mounted his horse. The wolves gathered along the ridge like silent guardians of a legend complete. Evelyn looked at him one last time. "Where will you go?" Caleb turned toward the rising sun. The wolf fur on his shoulder stirred in the wind. His voice came calm, haunted, immortal. "Wherever the wicked still think the wilderness has forgotten them." And, as he rode into the dawn, the West carried his name farther than ever before. Not as the boy they left for wolves, not as the son of a dead man, but as the legend born from the night the law tried to kill truth. Some men are made by the law. Legends are made by what the law tried to kill.